Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call.
Mr. Bordenaro.
Here.
Mr. Paradis.
Here.
Mr. Fernandez.
Here.
Mr. Grady.
Here.
Mr. Holmes. Mr. Miller.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Into the budget presentation. Walsh, you gonna start off?
I'll kick it off. I was hoping that when I look on something else, I'll say, "Let's get started." That's good, that's good.
Well, I thank everybody for coming. I'll have a
So-
statement at the end.
Right, so we have a wonderful presentation planned from the town and the Board of Ed. But I do want to just make take 30 seconds to set the stage here. So the budget package that you have, the fiscal year 2024 budget material in front of you, it reflects the town's priorities based on the conversation we have had with you, the elected officials, and then the town council and the meetings that we have had. Okay. So one, I would say, I hit on the top section one so that we know where it comes from. For the longest time, we have talked about the HVAC project, the elementary school. That's in this budget. It's long overdue. It's in this budget. The second one is the police station renovation. You know, we have talked about this for many, many months. There was a needs analysis done with an architect, Public Building Commission took over the project. They have a end product now ready to go, and that's reflected in this project. The other one I would talk about is the last year, Commissioner Wilson talked about the need to add more police officers to address the current needs of the community. We added 2 during fiscal year 23, 2 more in 24, so entire all 4 positions are reflected or funded in the fiscal 24 budget. Mayor Mark Brzezinski had an ad hoc committee involving the Board of Finance, the Police Commission, and the Police Union to address the PD pension, bring it back, because that's an area that we want to improve to recruit police officers. That's reflected in this budget. In addition to that, one of the things I would add is the capital. You know, thank you to the Board of Finance and the council. The last 2 or 3 years, we were able to fund the capital needs from the surplus, but we want to try and get some capital into this, at least reflect 1% of the capital infrastructure, which is about 300 million. We will do a whole process and we have some capital. Right. Finally, I would say that the joint meeting of Board of Finance, council, and the Board of Ed that we had in the fall, Bordenaro gave us a charge to try and bring the town operation under 2%, and that's reflected in this budget as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin to go over the presentation. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation or at the end. Happy to answer.
Thank you.
Jeff, can you dim the lights here? I don't want to unplug it and open the diffusion. There's a way. Very good. Thank you, thank you. So now that's probably too much.
One more so we can take a.
There's no sleeping.
All right.
How's that?
It's fine.
It's too much, I think.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah.
You know, for the mayor, I can give a little stroke. I'll wait till you come.
All right.
All right, so just kind of the lay of the land for tonight for the agenda. So we'll start with an overall, it's the overall town of Berlin budget. Then the Board of Ed will present the Board of Education operating budget that the board adopted. Then we'll go over to the general government budget. Talk then about revenues, long-term liabilities, capital transfers, and then water control. Starting out, we've had this box for a few years now, so I just wanted to take a minute to kind of talk about this as kind of the baseline of as we go through the budget process. The items on the right For folks who have an opportunity to decide where they're going to live, those are what we're hearing and what we've seen from folks is those are the biggest factors. They're the factors in home value. They're the factors in a decision of where you would choose to live or not. The quality of the education, having desirable cultural and recreational offerings across an age span. And that could be everything from passive recreation, golf course, to fields for kids in school, and as well as a safe community. No matter how much you have, if your community is not safe, you're going to struggle. In order to accomplish that, we need to invest in the infrastructure. Fields, buildings, roads, there has to be quality to support that. And of course, public safety. You're going to see those are the priorities throughout this budget as you go through the process. Two other things to point. We focused on recurring expenses being funded with recurring revenues. We want to try to avoid one-time items. It's almost the classic dog chasing the tail because you're constantly catching up year after year to the one-time items you have the year previous. And as Arosh said, this budget tries to fund the priorities we've heard from the town council, and the Board of Ed, I know, had extensive meetings and it reflects the priorities there. As far as what's in here, we obviously start every year with the required long-term obligations. Debt gets put into the budget. There should never be a point where the town of Berlin makes a decision not to fund debt or even allude to not funding debt. Then we talk about ongoing operations, just keeping what we have. So continuing what people have and continuing those functions, maintaining legal, contractual, and regulatory compliance. Sometimes that's more difficult than it seems, as the state, sometimes the feds loft on new unfunded mandates and sometimes late in the process, but we do try to do that. Then we get into the areas of investment in 24. So we talked about infrastructure and public safety, and then underlying all of this is also the desire for economic development, to expand your tax base to help fund this without constantly going back to the well. And in here, you're going to see things like school HVAC and the police station. Within the capital plan, there are needs to improve in the BHS courtyard. We talked at the last Board of Finance meeting about some of the moisture issues that are happening there, and we want to get it now before it becomes a major issue in a classroom. Fields, roads, and then for public safety, police pension, new police officers, but also, and we'll go through here in a little bit, school vans that are desperately in need of catch-up. The last couple of cycles, we worked on catching up with the police cruisers and tried to keep pace. We've worked on catching up with fire vehicles and keep pace. We're at a point, and it was no particular order, it just happened to be that order, but the school vans, and it's in your binder, the actual analysis that Mr. Cugno and his team did that are going to show you all of the vans that the town has, the age and the mileage. I think when you look at that, you'll agree there's a number of them that need to be replaced. We have highway trucks, school cameras for continued security, and bridges on the Timberland Golf Course. So this covers the full spectrum when we talk infrastructure, education, culture, recreation, safety, and then of course, continued economic development, Steel Boulevard, Farmington Ave, Berlin Turnpike, and all of those things that have happened there. To achieve the long-term priorities this year, more than any of the other years that I've sat here for a budget, we really are operating from, we always talk sometimes about the three-legged stool. It's really a four-legged stool this year. Grants, whether it's the ARPA grant that's helping with the HVAC at Willard, whether it's hopefully additional HVAC grants from the state, and other grants we will go after, including areas for trails and open space and other things that are pursued regularly. There's fund balance. We are looking at, and later on, I will go through the starting point from the audited ACFR down through what has already been used from fund balance and the proposal with the surplus this year. There's an element of debt in here. Last time we bonded was June of 2020, which is great. It's helped really pay down the debt. You'll see that in a slide later on. But the town has some significant projects. And not only it's just a matter of being able to fund them, many times it's wise to fund them because you're able to spread the cost over many years rather than burdening one particular year with a substantial project. And then finally, the mill rate. There has to be an element in order to make recurring revenues that are going to cover recurring expenses. You need to reflect the balance of the infrastructure and the operations that are in town into the mill rate. As we get into this, I just want to reset everybody. We have 3431 is the current mill rate. If you were to look at your tax bill, that is what you would see. However, as I'm sure you're all aware, the town went through the statutory required 5-year revaluation this year. So the top part on the left is all the same. It's the budget that was adopted. But as you get down and there's a grand list, we went from just over 2.4 billion to 2,869 million. So a substantial increase, almost 18% increase in the grand list. So as a starting point to have it apples to apples, we're taking the current budget and applying it against the new grand list. So you have a starting mill rate of 29.16, which is more reflective of where we should be as we talk about what the mill rate increase will be. Question was asked, we didn't do the reval. What was the real increase in the value, excluding the reval growth? And it's 2,225,000, and that's real estate, motor vehicle, personal property. One thing I really want to point out in the bottom red, even if we were to do nothing with the mill rate, so if it stayed at 29.16 and you said, let's put that out there, the burden, because of the growth that has happened in residential real estate, which is far greater than what we've seen in commercial real estate or even motor vehicle and personal property, there would be a shift of the tax burden over to residential real estate. It's just a bigger piece of that base as we look at it. If I were to take every residential household and I were to say, just put 29.16 and restate it, it's just shy of $1.9 million of a tax shift, not a grand list shift, a tax shift over. It's obviously not an individual house, but just to give you that perspective as a starting point, it would require essentially going backwards in the budget in order to have a household pay the same taxes on average. There are households that did go down in valuation, therefore their taxes would likely go down, but the vast majority went up. So I just want to put that out there.
Nobody was.
Excuse me?
Just so I understand, you said the 1.9 million, is that tax dollars that shifted from commercial industrial over to real estate?
Residential real estate.
Residential,
Yep.
I mean.
Yep. Yes.
So that's what we were looking for.
Yep. So now we get to the overall budget. The overall budget is $105.6 million. It's up 9 million or 9.3% from last year, from the budget we're operating in this year. The mill rate to fund that would be 32.19. That's up 3.03 mils versus the restated or 29.16 I just went through. State funds within the budget are based on Governor Lamont's proposed budget that he gave, as the governor does every single year. Again, the budgeted grand list, which is up just shy of 18% year over year in total. The key drivers, 2.9 million of it is capital, 2.866 is Board of Ed operations, just over $1 million is net DB pensions. I say net because there was $185,000 of pension money. That is both the old closed plan and the new proposed police pension. 723,000 of net debt service. If there's no new debt issued, we have about $200,000 backwards. So that's net. 644,000 of town operations, excluding the 4 new police officers that Roche talked about. And then Department 59 and 61, that's kind of the overlapping between town operations and Board of Ed that are shared services. That really is the breakdown. Those are the major categories that are driving this increase.
You're going to show more in depth. That's what it's like.
Yep.
Before includes the benefits too.
Sorry?
Before includes the benefits.
Yes. Yep. Benefits ex pension, not the pension. Pension is always in its own line in long-term liability. So this is sort of the overall pie chart, and we'll go through each of these pieces as we move through. But it gives you a feel for where the increases are coming from. One thing I will point out as you look at long-term liabilities, you have debt, increase 723, pension 1,490,000, and then 457. That's the change in the police pension. That's the DC value. So the idea is you're currently paying active police officers a defined contribution match. That would come out and the pension, the DB would go up. So you want to look at the net of those two as the actual impact to the year-over-year budget. Last slide before I turn it over to the Board of Ed. This is just the typical pie breakdown that we look at, 59% versus 41%. Education, as has been requested in the past, it includes the Board of Ed as well as Department 61 and 59, with 59 being private schools, St. Paul's, and as well as the school debt portion. So the school's portion of the debt. The box in the blue is what I was referring to as far as the overlap, what's in the general government budget versus is education related, but shows up in general government. We're turning it over to the board. Any questions?
Mark, just for your information, if you go back to the slide that shows the previous one. No, next one.
Sorry,
Shows the
this one.
the previous one. One with, yeah, that one there.
Okay.
It shows the 1490 of the pension, and then the 457 for reduction for the fine. The net number is about $1 million, okay? So in the past, we used fund balance to accommodate the old pension plan. There's $740,000 approximately in that number that we every year we use fund balance to accommodate that. And this budget is not accommodated, so it's showing the growth.
Okay, gotcha.
And later on in long-term liability, I will walk you through the two different pieces. And in your binder, there is under tab 10, I believe it is the actual actuaries report of the old pension plan, where you'll see that number's just pulled straight from the actuaries analysis. Anything else?
Right, well, good evening, thank you for having us. Perfect, thank you. I know initially we were trying to get through today, but now we didn't need to, so. Anyhow, this is like our third time going through presenting. I'm not sure who was at the presentation 2 weeks ago, but it's very similar, but I'm just gonna go through it just a little bit quicker, just so we can provide clarity, answer questions, and then it's freshly presented. So this is the board adopted budget for the 2023-2024 fiscal year. Oh, I'm backwards. Okay, so the goals for the upcoming school year to provide a quality education, prepare students for multiple options and opportunities important with our budget, maintain favorable class sizes and course offerings that families expect from Berlin Public Schools, support technology, and commit to a safe learning environment for all students and staff. And Berlin's beliefs about learning: all students learn when they feel safe, included, respected, and valued by their community. We must believe in, challenge, and support all students to reach their personal goals and our high expectations. Learning is enhanced by a cycle that includes goal setting, practice, feedback, and reflection. And students are empowered and engaged by choice and authentic learning experiences. So we have our budget at a glance, 2 different ways. It was represented, well, one way represented differently. So we have a pie. Right, this is like, oh, it was moving upside down. We have a pie chart and a stacked bar. And this represents the 5.84% that the Board of Education voted on. The majority of the board came in at that. The superintendent initially came in with a 4.87% after much discussion, the workshop, and then our board meeting. It was voted at a 7.2. majority vote to increase it to 5.84, and I'm gonna get into the why. So as you can see, you know, it's represented better here, that 72% are contractual obligations. Then we have our contracted services, transportation and utilities, tuition, supplies, materials, and textbooks, only 1%, equipment and all others, 4%, new staff, 3%. And I'm gonna just provide additional clarity throughout what those mean. So as you see right here, the 4.24% is contractual obligations. So staffing changes, this is important. We're adding a new position at Griswold because of projected enrollment. Griswold is packed. We need to put in an additional kindergarten teacher. We strive to have favorable class sizes, and a class kindergarten size of 25 is not favorable to anyone involved. And then existing positions that were previously grant funded, they have to come out of the ESSER and go into the operational. So this is just 0.5% of our budget. It comes in at 0.4, and it's $226,777. The staffing changes. This right here gives a little bit more information. So this is new for the fiscal year. This is what has been added into the budget for the fiscal year. So career pathways, we've budgeted 100,000. And this is for our CNA course to reconfigure space. This is something that is in line with our goals and providing career pathways for our students that are less traditional than the typical college pathways that we've offered. But this is important because it's providing opportunities for students to learn about the health sciences, healthcare field, giving them the opportunity to get out and start working and seeing what they're really most interested in. At our last board meeting on February 13th, we had students who came out and spoke to this. So if you did not watch that meeting, I recommend going back, and then you can really hear the impact that students said that this program has. But we want to be able to reach more students. That's important. The new teaching position, like I just discussed, is for the kindergarten teacher at Griswold, and then mandated training. That's in compliance with House Bill 5321. So again, when things are mandated by the state, as much as we would like to say, sorry, we don't have to do that, as agents of the state, not of the town, that is our duty as board members to follow through with that. And then we can always go speak to our legislators if we're not happy about that, but for the time being, the 34,500 is added. And then what is coming out of ESSER are 2 positions funded that need to get moved back into our general funds. And ESS at McGee. We've had families come out and speak on multiple occasions about the benefits of ESS, the importance of ESS. I know that town council has heard from them in the past, and the Board of Finance as well. And this is really important at this time, considering, you know, all that students are going through that, you know, goes beyond the needs of just the basic teaching and learning that happens if we're not able to teach the students. And then we have issues of truancy or whatever comes of that, then, you know, the school is liable for that. So,
So what are the positions exactly? What's the?
so the 2, it's on the previous, it's on the previous slide. It's the family.
The family communications specialist and the literacy position coming out of the ESSER from last year. The ESS program at the high school, a number of years, parents have come and spoken to the budget hearing.
Yep.
And we've had it with ESSER, the funds we funded in FP. Currently at McGee, there's one commitment from Effective School Solutions at McGee can service up to 10 students. We have a waiting list and prioritize speakers. which times we know that service. Those are for some of our, most struggling graduates, enabling, and hospitalized.
So one thing,
Just a question.
Yeah.
So on that, we have a challenge in terms of trying to come up with a reasonable increase. In the budget,
Mhm.
you know, already, because 10% is not going to be, achievable. okay? It doesn't make sense, we're still dealing, inflation, potential recession. We can't go out with a 10% increase over that. And so that's my opinion, the team can speak for themselves. So my question is, you have ESS, not ESS, but you have ESSER remaining funds.
so the thing with ESSER is next year's the last year, correct?
Funds will expire. We do
The
not,
funds should
we do
expire.
not have, we do not have a extra fund this day for US.
Okay. All right, so I'm looking at it, can you use some of that to accommodate this budget?
ESER two expires in September 30th. And by the time we are finished with our summer programming that we've allocated with the remainder of ESER two, those funds will be fully exhausted, so there won't be anything available in ESER two. As far as our ESER, we use some of those funds to offset budget positions as well, so we won't have enough to do ESS. There may be some to reallocate from projects that came in under budget, but it's not going to be 110. We'll have those definitive numbers once the budget.
I was looking at the last report. So I guess that's why I was asking. We're gonna use them all up from fiscal year.
I'm saying there won't, as I see it, there will not be enough to cover. Yes, there may be some funds off that, but we cannot cover the full.
And I think a conversation that we had last year that, was important to all of us is that we didn't make a funding pledge with our ESSER funds. So we're putting all these positions in programs. So then all of a sudden we have to now add the back end. So the few things that are added back in, it's not what it could have been if, the past few years, we loaded up the grants, the way it wasn't intended to be,
You're still dealing with the effects of the pandemic. Right?
but they're not gonna. tell you
But
what
you're
it is.
still dealing with the effects of the pandemic. So some of the things that we've been doing today are associated with mental health, probably got worse with the pandemic situation. And the kids learn loss also. So I'm still thinking, that some of your budget that you include is still kind of pandemic related, as opposed to, maybe do you really need that much? If it was a normal situation.
Well, I think, we're not in a normal situation, unfortunately, and I don't think that anyone's gonna come bail us out, the state or the federal government at this point.
I'm hearing that the state is coming up with all kinds of funds to kind of.
Nothing's.
You haven't seen anything,
Right.
but I'm reading that they're coming up with. So.
We needed ESS before
Yeah.
COVID.
I'm not asking about.
We need it specifically.
That's what I'm talking, John.
And, and I think with the pathways, just to go back to that, a lot of criticism we've received over the years is, there's two sides to it. Families only want college, AP college credit courses, and that's supposedly all Berlin Public Schools cares about. That's one side of the argument. The other side is we don't do enough for our students who aren't going to college. And I think it's really important, especially with everything right now happening with the Supreme Court and student loan forgiveness, and this is more prevalent now than it was 20 years ago, that we are creating opportunities for students so they can explore all different career pathways without having, $100,000 price tag tied to it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to give you a heads up, there was a school mental health workers grant that was a competitive grant that we did apply for to try and cover the ESS program for the next 3 years, and we did not.
Right, I sent the letter to Donna Beach as well, correct?
Yes, we didn't qualify.
Okay, we didn't qualify.
Just many of the grants we apply for, whatever's eligible, and oftentimes we don't qualify. Because of the fiscal state of the town. Aside the support services that we already have in place, that's the town. That's typically the reason.
Okay.
So if you're looking, so this slide right here, You can look through a little bit closer on your end, but if you know, as we've talked about in the past, a zero-based budgeting approach, we're taking our whole $51,949,019.60 and allocating 100% of it to categories. This is where it is allocated. You can see the percentage difference. You know, you can see 21, 22, the budget, the actual 22, 23, and then 23, 24. And you can see the trajectory right there. So this line item increased 2.73% due to the contracts. 5 administrators are eligible for step increases, and then non-affiliated administrators, so they're not in the union, they're just gonna get 3% increases, so it's in line with everyone else, you know, roughly. However, one thing I do want to bring up is in this slide, we reduced the position last year. That was a significant cost savings. I don't really feel like, you know, we haven't spent too much time discussing this as, you know, a board, the Board of Ed with the Board of Finance or even Town Council, but I think it's important to, you know, draw your attention to. We reduced the assistant superintendent's position, which was very much needed, but we wanted to do our due diligence and making sure that if we're reducing in areas that are gonna, you know, we're taking, you know, reducing with other positions, we're also doing administration. And a lot of that work has fallen on the shoulders of the superintendent and his team. And I just think it's important to just note that we did reduce. And we continue to reduce, and usually when we take away, we don't add that. So I wanted to bring that up.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
While you were back on the big
Yeah.
object expenditures.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Although it really doesn't show here, can you just speak a little bit to how overall special education costs are impacting you in the coming year?
Yes,
I
so
mean, because I've been hearing not only from people in Berlin, but other places that certain impacts of COVID, et cetera, are boosting the number of placements. Not only people that have to be sent out, but the number of
services
kids
provided,
that have to
absolutely.
have service.
In
So could you
special
speak to that?
education services are increasing, and I can have Brian speak to that a little bit more, but I think the pandemic certainly exacerbated issues for students that might not have been shown. And the thing with special education is if students qualify and they need services, like we as a board, Brian and his team, we can't just say, okay, they don't get that because we can't afford that. So I'll let you guys speak to that.
I'll speak to it with you for you, Julie, but our budget driven by over 25% by special education, the total budget. Our numbers of special education students that are qualifying are up this year, even more so than before, post-pandemic. We have more students also being assessed to see if they do qualify for services. So to say that what you're saying is going across the state and across the country is definitely happening here in Berlin. The other piece is, I'm going to ask Linda to speak more, but as Julia tried to say, if students that we had this year move into town, and they have an individual education plan, an IEP, we are required by law to follow them, whether it's budget or not. The student moves to town that's receiving services outplaced for $150,000, we need to pay that, the rest of those funds, to educate that student moving forward. So whether it's in the budget or not. The other big piece of impact of the budget is the number of outplacements that we use to put placeholders in for outplacement. Typically, you should see in this budget, it's a note that says any additional choice can be used. So do you want to
And-
speak?
And when we do, I think it's also important to note, and I know it was at one of our board meetings a few meetings ago. Through ESS at the middle school, we were able to bring back outplacement, so it's actually a cost saving vehicle, correct?
We were actually working a student back at the high school.
Okay, the high school, but overall, Do you want to speak to the special education costs, the mental health component and spoke about it could just be so many those. Whether it's an IEP or it seems like you can even stay ahead of it. It rates of mental illness completely go across the country. We work very hard to keep our students in district, and we do that by bringing in reassess, by developing our own house program. Sometimes our income programs don't work for all of our kids. Our numbers have been up about 30 for outplace kids. Every time I think we're going to get it down to 25, 24, we have that we have students aging out, students graduating this year. I really felt our numbers will be down to 25 next year. I've already outplaced kids this year. That I didn't have on the radar at all that we would be outplaced. You never know. It's like this. And like Julia said, I know we have a student moving in right now. They started building a house here 2 years ago. They said they were coming in. I think they're closing on their house in the next couple of weeks. That student is outplaced. And it's such a moving target that I always tell Brian, I'm so nervous that we can have $150,000 student move in and we don't have any funds anymore that we used to have in the choice fund. Now we have staff in this choice fund. And that's what we get concerned with. But I can tell you that ESS program at the middle school, if you talk to any of the administrators, any of our school counselors, any of our teachers that have ever had some have a commission there, if we had to outplace those 9 students at an average of $80,000 per student, it speaks for itself right there and how much, what a cost savings that is. That's an average. Our out of district tuitions range anywhere probably from 65,000 up to 250,000 per student. And that doesn't include transportation.
We have, you said board currently, we have how many pending right now?
Those are the 4. Just outplace one, our first and one tomorrow. So yeah, we have 4. And unfortunately, it's not like when we go to bid with a project with the town, we can't like pick and choose what the cheapest or best offer is going to be. It's really specific to the needs of the student. So yeah, that's. Any other questions on that? To certified staff. This is our certified staff. Well, that you have that slide. That's the percent of the budget. We already talked about that in the opening, our portion of that. So I think it's important to show that we have in fact reduced. And we are also below the state average when it comes to our teacher pay. So, if there is talk that, we don't negotiate hard enough, or we don't do a good enough job at bringing our teachers in, like, first off, we want to attract quality teachers in our town. We don't want to get the bottom of the barrel in June or July who haven't yet been hired. We want quality teachers. Everyone sitting in here who has had children in the school or has children in the school appreciates that about the school. And, when we go to contract negotiations, sure, if you could speak to the process if you're interested, you don't have to. She was in those negotiations and she saw firsthand how hard we did fight to come in where we came in. I know that's just right there. But it's important to note that we're not just giving away the house for fun because, we come in with this mentality of we love teachers and we want to give them everything. We do love teachers and we want them to be well paid and we want to make sure we're hiring the best. But at the same time, our negotiations are taken very serious.
Could you just clarify what you mean by the best? Because I see like in the certified staff, you got so many teachers at the top step. Are you hiring if you have an opening, are you hiring the teacher that has the most experience, years of experience coming in at the higher step? Or are we bringing in kids out of college?
Absolutely. Right. And I think it goes for the position, right? And what position you're trying to fill, who the candidate pool is. Ryan is not budgeting for, the $115,000 teacher top step, that is extremely costly. But again, a quality teacher coming right out of college, most teachers do need a master's. With no experience can be in the 60,000s. And then it only goes up from there to over 100,000. So if you want to speak more to that, but
The only reason I
Yeah.
asked is my daughters were both teachers. They try to get in different places and whatever, and it can be hard for sometimes, not now, probably anybody will take it now,
well, yeah,
but I also know from dialogues with them, or whatever, it's like the kids that come right out, not kids, but adults that come right out of college, they're ambitious, they're hungry, and they're willing to work. They're the ones, like where my daughters work, they're the ones that take up all these other things for the $1,000 here, the 1,500 here,
I don't-
serving on this
yeah.
committee, serving on that committee. And
as a teacher personally, I don't disagree with you on that.
I just.
But I think also first, I also think first year teachers can come with a liability or not a liability, a price tag. Because you need to pay to educate them further, professional development, training, getting them acclimated, onboarding, someone with, 2 to 3 to 5 years experience. They already have a few years under their belt, so they could potentially be cheaper, but if you want to speak. to
Well,
that?
I'm fine with that, as long as
Yeah.
we're not constantly going for the 10 to 15 years or 15 to 20 years experience. Up at the top level, I mean.
We budget masters, steps six. So that can fluctuation whether we're hiring a front teacher right out of college, which we definitely do with a bachelor's degree, but we also do hire people with experience. The message has always been to hire the best qualified person for that position at that given time. But that does not mean that someone like Alex is not the best person.
As long as that's what I was getting.
I could very easily generate. But that's people are coming in, and you'll see teachers that are first year and teachers that have 10, 12 years experience. But depending on the position, some positions right now are very difficult to fill, and it's gonna, in my opinion, it's gonna be even more competitive to get the positions. And be based on, as you said, now it's much different than what it's been as far as the candidates that are out there.
I just wanted to clarify for myself, I just had this image in my mind, it's like I'm running an electrical contracting company, and I have 30 employees, and everyone's a master electrician. That's not,
Right,
I'm gonna be out of business running my business that way.
It's also needs of the department, looking for a department head, obviously,
Right,
wants
that's different.
experience, right?
in the last bullet here, the 50/50 cost sharing with CCTA with Pomo. I know that we provided you guys that information a few months ago. There's opportunity later to discuss more about that. But I just wanted to bring your attention to that. So, non-certified salaries. This is, again, the family communication specialist that was previously funded in ESSER, mandated training for paraprofessionals, which is required, non-affiliated contracts, again, budgeted at 2%. So we had to increase the substitute rate because we can't find substitutes. That's, again, another statewide problem. And I believe Berlin is probably, you're not paying top in the state either. Yeah,
Our salary has reduced over the year by 20 almost a year, we're down like 23, so we've changed the pay structure as well as most of it, the annual event to change the qualification. So overtime,
yeah, please.
we take blocks of time required by high school, have all events taking place in that block of time. We're not paying like overtime for all day Sunday. If you're gonna be in the high school, then we're coming in with a 6-hour block. And that's it. So we are looking at overtime also.
So as you know, the employee benefits, this rate is set by the town and, the changes that will be adjusted. Contracted services, so we discussed the ESS program, indeed. And the educational software systems, which have a 3 to 7% increase annually. We can't say that we're gonna just stop using Power School or Naviance or Taladet or any of those commonly, used programs, because then we're suddenly not gonna be able to keep up with the times. Legal fees, copy leases, athletic trainers, other expenses have all increased as well. The athletic trainer, you had mentioned, came in double, right?
That's not just our.
It's across the board, yep. Utilities, as we know. Those are increasing, and that's why it's 20%. And the PPTA is split 50%. Transportation, this is an increase of 1%. This is actually greater than 1%, correct? But
No,
in our budget it's reflected as one.
No, it's 1%, even though NTP's contract is
It's
3%.
That's it.
So you have a 3% increase, how can you get 1%? So that was the explanation, but when you negotiate on fuel cost prices with gas and diesel fluctuating, as we all know. There's the number of technical schools the district transports to. There's less students going to technical schools and less schools that are transported. There's a little decrease there. And the district intends to use excess cost funds, typically the state. Reimbursed at 70%. It's been set, they talked to 72. They're saying it must maybe as much as 80% on educational cost sharing. So we'll use a portion of that to offset the transportation. That's why we're coming in at 1%. Otherwise, we'd be increased.
Tuition, we talked a little bit about the special education. And the unanticipated special education placements that we have talked about. And that increased 1% increase for our special education health placement. And it also accounts for students aging out of the magnet school tuition program. If a student goes to a magnet school, the VOAG technical school, not technical. So the magnet schools and the VOAG, we have to pay that cost. So that's another reason why we want to keep our programs and personnel competitive. So students stay in district, it costs a lot less. Yes.
That's a question, please, with, because I just was reading on the CABE, the newsletter, obviously with the past, legislation with the free lunches, which we just got notification of. They also talked about something about fixing the special ed excess costs. So
Yeah.
what would that mean for this year, next year?
So I read that as well, but there wasn't any information to follow up with that. Do you have information on that?
Yeah.
This year, so typically the state reimburses at 70%. The talk is that was go to 72. The latest talk is to be like 80, correct?
Well, for this year, they're adjusting it for this year, because they didn't have it formulated correctly where they would expense all of the funds available for excess cost out to the district. So they reallocated the percentages, and now it's based on your wealth rate. So there's 3 different tiers. This year, we were originally going to get 73% reimbursement for, but they have corrected it. We're looking at 88% reimbursement for this year. It has not been discussed if that is going to change for the next fiscal year, or if it's still going to be the 73%. For the next fiscal year.
Just to know, that excess cost number has fluctuated with the state, and what they're supposed to give. So even though they're saying it's in the 80s, we could change. So I don't want anyone to say, oh, it's definitely because it's changed. It's never fully funded the way they're supposed to do. The 70's been a typical number that we kind of face.
Does that answer your question? Nicole?
Yeah, I was just trying to understand.
Any other questions? So with the exception of supplies needed for the career pathway program, like we discussed, there has been a 0% increase to the other budgets. Principals and department leaders have redistributed funds from supplies, equipment, all of their expenditures for the last 30 years for their students for the upcoming year. And with the rising costs of inflation, a 0% increase is a cut to the building and department budgets. This slide right here. So 2 things I would like to highlight. This line item guide. So the first thing is with Public Act 22-118, as much as people believe that we should or should not, it is the bill through the Connecticut General Assembly that has to be funded. So If anyone would like a copy, I made sure we had copies. I've heard rumors that our budget has to be this high because we have to suddenly provide, this in our schools, but it's, again, this is another one of the state mandates that comes down and, the school just has to provide this. So we have copies if anyone would like to see that. And the next component about equipment. So we don't have a replacement cycle for our technology. So when we do have the end of the year funds, we don't put our technology here in equipment. We do our best to fund it through our end of the year money that we, try and make good choices throughout the year, budget well, adequately, and then the replacement happens with end of the year funding. We're not putting the replacement of Chromebooks and iPads into our operational budget. Again, we're trying to come in as lean as possible. I know at a 5.84%, it doesn't seem that way, but I think it's important noting that we don't have the, any technology replacement here. It's not fully funded, right? And I go,
In one of your earlier slides, you had indicated that one of the additions was $100,000 for career pathways. How much of this increase of 101,000 in other expenditures is that?
so I can let you speak to that.
No, that 101,000, we're estimating that classroom, so we can figure it, it'll be somewhere close to $100,000.
So that's,
That's
so
it.
the career pathways program is just this, or it's this plus the 100,000?
No, it's just this is it.
The pathways program did not have any budget this past year. In order to offer a certified nurses aid program, we have to fit a classroom for that. In order to offer the program. That's what I'm using.
And again, speaking to the testimonials of the students and the enrollment of that class, like this class has gained popularity in the school. There's a, high demand from the students and parents who are interested in it. Though it's a tough budget year and, inflation and recession are amongst us, this is something that I think, offers students the opportunity to work.
Are there unique equipment needs or something for this classroom?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we have to have certified instructor, which is different than training, but a firefighting course. Some of the career pathways, we don't have teachers that have those types of certifications. So the outside person teaching something functions. We had students that did take the course on the weekend outside the school. The thought is to offer them the full day to make it available to all students. We might currently have over 20 students that would like to enroll in the course for next year. So we need to get the hospital beds, the right, conditions to run the course.
Do you have something in your packet here that tells us this career pathways program, what different careers
So we
are
don't
included and
hear,
how many kids are participating? Or it's not there now?
There's multiple courses that are involved, but it's not at a level. I could share with you how many students are taking the current courses, the firefighting, emergency medical services. These students that want to take the CNA course, but it's also going out on field trips, visiting, machine shops, aerospace. And so on. So I could give you a write-up about how many students are involved currently, but it's not totally built yet. We just started this year. Started getting the courses set and moving forward with it. It's the one area where you can see that we're putting additional funds towards.
but if you go on VHS TV, that's not a packet, but on our February 13th meeting, we had two presentations, one by the students and then one by the principal, correct? Yeah,
No, we had it by the consultant as well as
Right.
Billy.
okay, so
A short video on that.
And it's getting more popular. I was at an event and some parents have heard from that and didn't even know we offered it from the video. And so now parents are starting to hear these things, but a lot of it has to do with, we've all been programmed to train our kids to go to college. Every parent has, every teacher has, every guidance counselor has, this is what we do. So now it's also word of mouth. And because of that, parents are now saying, oh my gosh, my child needs this.
I have to get them, and I've heard several say, this is like incredible. And when we had to fill out our coursework for next year, and we had to just do all that last week, and I have 2 kids in high school, so I had to fill that out. But a conversation parents, they kept asking me, I had more text messages on this. This is something that can be really big for this.
No question, I
Yeah,
think the budget.
no, please, that's good.
Enrollment has not gone overall back with last year's. So my question is, we're getting 20 students studying for this new program. Is another class now required because they were going to a college class? So are you eliminating a class because your student count?
So when you talk about electives, it looks at every year to say where enrollment, how many are enrolled in the course. So if there were fewer students by that, then yes, we would know, but 20 students would necessitate, and that's what they're all pulled from one class. I think when you look at enrollment this past year, we've taken in since September 1, an additional 100 students where we started with. So the enrollment, as much as it's going down, and you heard at the last board meeting, the discussion about the new apartments that are going to open up in town, and what does that do for enrollment in the next year also? So as much as our report may say, like, next year we're decreasing 40 some odd students, the reality is we really haven't decreased because they're coming in after. So, I mean, I can give you, it's not, and everything on the reports are saying it's supposed to over the next 5 years maintain. But, you know, it's a fair question after taking this, but I want to say one thing, it's not just career pathways. So like our board rep has no intention of staying as a certified nurse's aide. He took the course because he wants to get into the field. He wants to be in the medical field, so he wants to get the endorsement, so now he can go out and be at least in the area that he wants to work. So it's dual for, it's not just they're gonna go through, it's all. Right, exactly, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And we're also gonna adjust the enrollment towards the end. We put aside into that. So you can see the 5-year comparisons. I'm just going ahead of myself too fast. Yeah, no, maybe I haven't talked about that.
Yeah.
Oh, mine, okay, sorry. Any questions on this? Hartford Open Choice Enrollment, this is actually really important to discuss. So we always try and stay above 4% for the reimbursement. So I know that I believe we've clarified this in the past, so it's understood, but just because we're bringing forth so many choice students does not mean we're adding classes, we're putting them in classes where we have spaces. So it's not costing the district additional money. And we do rely on the choice grant to offset our budget. However, after the pandemic, all districts that participate in the choice program are seeing a decline. It has nothing to do with Berlin. It has to do with the choice program and students choosing to stay in Hartford. So that impacts our funding. So just because this year we're at 3.61%, doesn't mean they're going to say, okay, let's round up and give you the 4% reimbursement. Once we drop below the 4%, we start losing funding. So we are expanding the seats to 110. We do not believe that we are going to get that. But if we don't do that, then we're not doing our due diligence to offset this budget and make, wise budgetary choices. So for the 2022-2023 year, we offered 39 seats and only 19 were filled. We did everything we could to try and go out and get kids to come in. So Brian, do you want to add anything to this?
This is not something unique to Berlin, this is across the state with choice numbers. And major component is the transportation. We don't control the transportation, it's run through CREC. And it's an issue with getting students to school on time, and getting students to daily, and the lag time to when they start, so it's a conflict.
And then this is just anticipated budget.
So, can you just go back?
Yeah.
I don't really understand this very well. I understand your numbers, but from a the net cost of Berlin, good to have these or not good to have these, and why?
You can speak to it, sure.
So I'd like to talk about the students first of all. I think we interviewed with the students and the parents and the video on. For the students, it's fantastic. They recognize what the opportunity that being part of the Berlin Public Schools is more than yet. From a cost standpoint, we use the funds that we receive. If we're at 4%, reimbursement rate per student is $8,000. Now, you might say, well, why would you take $8,000 when we're paying $20,000 per student? Because when we take the students, we're placing them with first level. So let's say we take hypothetically 15 K students next year. We put one in each class. So it doesn't raise the number. They don't add additional teachers. Revenue that we receive, the grant we receive from those students.
But that's the incremental look at it versus like, you know, if you didn't have 110 students, what would that mean to personnel?
It wouldn't make a difference
Wouldn't make a
whatsoever.
difference.
Oh, no.
Nope.
Hard to envision, but.
Well, they would say you have 12 K classes, right? You take 20 students. If you put 2 in some of those classrooms and 1 in the other, that doesn't raise the number of teachers you have. And the thing is, you're not going to cut a K teacher because they're not all in one building.
I understand that.
So there's no, if taking on those students, there's no impact to the number of staff you're hiring. If the students need additional services, like special education students, they're reimbursed through Harvard. We don't pay for that. So if they need a para, that's paid for. So we looked at the number of services. There's less than 6% of students who are receiving services from here. The other piece is the monies that are in the next, well, Julie, go to the next slide. It's gonna show one of the slides here shows you.
The next one, right?
Yep. Yeah, this one, yeah, it shows you where the money is being spent for salaries, not for choice. You know, to think teachers for choice students, but teachers that are.
Classroom teachers.
It's just hard to ever imagine, you know, it's like a student enrollment goes up and down or whatever, and over time goes down, but you always hear the argument, well, it's 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here.
But it truly
And
is.
I know it is, but over a period of time, over 10 years, the 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 starts to add up. Because your argument is we can never get rid of a teacher, period, or get rid of a position.
Well, we do, and I think it was reflected previously, the one that where we reduced staff, this one right here. You can see that we've reduced staff like from 2017 through 2022. 267, 264, 259, 266, 270, 266. So we are making changes as need be, like we are trying to be as responsible as possible and adjust to enrollment, you know, the best way we possibly can. However, if you have 30 kids in one, like, let's say you have 30 kindergartners, you can't
I
put,
understand that.
but you could do 17 and 17, but you can't put 30 in one.
I understand.
So, but also our choice numbers are year to year, and the kindergartners were also year to year. So, you know, this slide right here, for this year, 11 kindergarten students. Next year, it might be 20, highly unlikely, but it's not that we are always doing 11 kindergarten. 3 second grade, 2 fourth grade, 1 fifth grade, 2 seventh grade, their siblings and relatives, but those are only offered because we have the space without adding additional classes. We also have until October 1st to fill those. So if, you know, September 1 comes around and it's not filled, we can continue to try. If we have the space, we again continue, but then, is that?
I understand.
I think part of it, what George is saying too, is that you have to look at the two together. I mean, I go through the audit and it shows that Berlin's enrollments declined 450 students in 10 years. And you add the 110 students from choice, that's lower than 500 students, and there's really no significant adjustment in staff. How long does this continue to staff?
I think if you go back, I think the parents, they have reduced staff. But I also think students' needs change. Where students are today after 2 years of the pandemic, is different from where they were years ago. So there has been adjustments made, as we talked about, one adjustment with administration, eliminating assistant superintendent, cutting teaching positions last year. Positions were cut last year, but if they're cut from one area and needed another area, we need to support the students we need. And so the thing is, if we do eliminate the choice program, which is a decrease and just phase out of it, that means that roughly, if we're at 3%, it'd be about $750,000 net to the budget decrease. We have to find 750. So you could factor in how many teachers that would be.
Well, my concern isn't as much with the choice program, it's with the general decline in population.
We're gonna actually, not to cut you off, but we are gonna speak to that on slide 34 and 33 and 34. It's on that.
I mean, with the audit, just this year's audit showed down 451 students in 10 years. And the teachers have pretty much run right in the 270 range through that whole length of time. So I don't know,
What audit are you speaking of though?
the general town audit that we get every year. Has numbers for every year.
I can run the two numbers, but I know people have been decreased where McGee middle school, I agree with you, if I look back at McGee's height, that was probably more than 10 years ago. It was somewhere close to 800 at height, and now it's close to 600. So yeah, but I know that there's a elimination of 2 teams at the middle school, which is 10 teachers that are no longer there. It doesn't mean that we didn't hire a reading teacher to get students in the reading help, or a math level, but maybe replace some, but there has been teachers reduction. There are teachers not hired at the high school last year because the requirements that were in place. But we also try to provide the services.
And that parents expect as well, so, you know, again, educational needs are changing. Yeah. Okay.
Here, so this was,
It's 2012,
so that what he's looking at?
I'm not sure.
I don't have a present.
Can we pass that to him?
Yeah.
This is the, this is from the spotter report, which is what is projection. This is projection. I can get actual,
Okay.
we have actual for teachers back 5 years, but I can get.
So we can, continue to discuss it around and I'm just gonna find out the slide and then we'll continue that. So this is just our funding history, you know, over the past few years, you know, from 2019 to now, we've been very close to work together and come up with favorable budgets that are best for, you know, that meet the needs of our community. And I think that's what's important. And I think it's important to say that, you know, working together and coming up with these numbers. But as we can all agree, things have changed. We're dealing with inflation. It's a reality and it's impacting everyone. But at the end of the day, you know, with a recession, with cuts, with inflation, parents do not want to see things taken from their kids. Parents don't want that.
We just have to remember there's a lot more than parents.
But I think
And we have multiple constituent groups that we have to take care of. We have to take care of seniors. We have to take care of, you know, people without children that are just starting off and making their way.
which I don't disagree with, you know, and up until 2 years ago, I was one of the people living in town. Paying taxes to a school system that I wasn't benefiting from, and my children are under 2.5 years old. So again, but for me, yeah, I don't disagree, but as I sit here on the Board of Education. I view it as it's my job to, you know, defend and stand by this budget.
I
But-
would say my job on the Board of Finance is to balance the needs of the community and our wherewithal and ability to pay for it. The problem with in the state of Connecticut, and this isn't on you guys, it's not whatever, the way that education is funded is the wrong way. It's done with a regressive tax, real estate taxes. Unfortunately, regressive taxes hit the lower income people more from a percent increase than a progressive tax does. And that's a problem. And with, you know, I've heard conversation before, it's like, well, you know, Berlin can afford it because we're like the 40th richest town or the 60th, whatever it is in the state. It doesn't matter because the issue is there's so many segments of the population of Berlin that earn below 75%. There's like 25% of the people in town are what they call more housing burden, okay? Housing burden, this came out of the affordable housing plan. It means that they pay in excess of 30% of their income to housing. Some of them pay as much as 50% of their income to housing. We have a number of seniors here. 54% of the senior households earn less than $75,000 a year. Okay, so the burden is really on them a lot. You know, a lot of them on fixed incomes and so forth. So I understand that overall we have a fairly affluent, from a median income perspective, but that's not how it plays out with a regressive tax. Some people get hammered really, really hard when you do a 10% tax increase, even a 5% tax increase. You know, that's food on the table or fuel to heat their house and whatever. It does matter. And that's what we struggle with. We have to balance that. So,
Right.
you know, I'm
Yeah.
all for giving the kids everything that they want, but it's a balancing act that we're trying to do.
And I think that it should also be noted that economic development in our town has been phenomenal over the past few years. And I know that, Roche and Mark, town council and other elected officials have been working really hard at that. And that should also be, taken into consideration when we're discussing, what education is asking for, because if we want our real estate and our economic development to continue to do well, then education is a really important piece of the puzzle.
I agree. And the other part of the important equation to that, and Chris Edge has said it multiple times, a stable tax base is the first thing commercial entities look at when they look to relocate to Berlin. So that's very important too. You can't be going up all over the place. You need to stay relatively stable, or these guys aren't coming to set up their businesses. So it's that balancing.
Well, thank you. So just the next few slides are just some comparisons. I know you guys have seen them. This is the 5-year increase. These aren't our DIRGs right here. These are just the towns that we frequently talk about. We're not a Farmington, we're not a Glastonbury, but we do talk about them. We have different demographics in Bloomington, but it's just important just to show a comparison, just a different picture of the data compared to this right here. So you can see where we're coming in. So even if we, as a board, adopted the superintendent's 4.87, we'd only be 2 spots above where we are right now. So right in the middle of the pack, you could see Southington requested, board came in at 7.31%, through North Haven 2.87%. And you can just see right where we are. Do you have anything to say about that before I move on?
I just think this is a reflection of our DIRG, so social economic towns that are often compared to. The state doesn't use this here anymore. But it was put together just to see what other towns are coming in. I just want to remind that, look at the stacked bar graph back at the beginning of the presentation. The key to the same programming and same staff that we have in place, no new staff, it's the same staff we have this year, including the benefits, contractual obligations. It's a 4.2% increase to maintain that. That's their contractual obligations for the staff as well as the benefits with the increase. So when you're taking the 4.2 and take the 5.84, that's subtraction, you're talking the 1.6% increase. That's not staff, that's actually staff related.
So here's the thing that's really elusive for me. If you go back to the budget funding history, whatever, last year was 4.67%, maintain the current whatever, and stay where we needed to be. But we survived.
We survived with cutting an
2.5.
assistant
So what
superintendent.
was cut?
We cut an assistant superintendent. We cut
What
that.
was cut in the quality of the education in Berlin?
Well, we have increased needs in special education.
What was the cut, the quality of the education? We're just trying to sort out,
So
we're just trying to sort out this gap, this graph, okay? This is what we deal with all the time. And this is what you got, and this is what you asked for, and now we're saying we asked for that, and then we want some more too. It just doesn't add up.
They're the ones in the schools and we're the volunteers.
Does that add up to anybody here?
Well, I put it together a chart in the last 5 years that we may have saw. I could explain it to you, but basically it says, here's what the superintendent asked for. Here's what you got. And then if you look at whatever surplus or whatever choice fund you didn't use, you could have used less, okay? So it's just a point in history that says financially, you could have lived with a lot less than even the approved budget. So you'll see that. And that doesn't even include at the end of year end, you have surplus in certain categories that you throw into equipment and supplies. Whereas in a normal business world, you would say, you got to give it back, what I'm saying? As opposed to, you say you got to buy technology. But at the end of the day, if you look at that chart, it's a telling story that says you don't need that much budget. If you look at financial numbers. And I just want the town and the citizens to understand that. Because when some of these numbers come out, you give the impression you don't get enough funds. To me, you get enough sufficient funds, and you have more than sufficient funds to meet your quality of education for your kids, based on the statistics. Okay, so that's why I put those charts together, to kind of let not only you know, but let the citizens know when they're voting on these budgets, understand you guys have been pretty comfortable overall in 5 years. You know, that's my opinion, okay? So-
But I think the voters do speak volumes, because while we've had, you know, the Board of Finance and the vote no to lower, the vote yes to high, those functions, the Board of Education haven't gotten a vote where the voters came out and said, no, you're getting too much. We are supported by the voters who come out. And then the parents are the ones who are coming out. So I know you said that the parents aren't the ones coming out and vote for, they're not all the constituents within our community, but they're the ones coming out and supporting. And then, you know, I know the mayor is aware of this, because you've been part of these meetings prior to the Board of Finance. When parents feel that their children's education is impacted, they come out and they come out with a lot of anger, almost with their pitchforks. And granted, like I showed, the past few years, we've worked really well together. I think it's proper managing of the money that has been given, but cuts have been made. An assistant superintendent has been cut. So what impact does that have? We try and cut where it least impacts the children. So it's impacting Brian and his administrative staff, where they're working more, they're working longer. And that's what they're willing to do, least impact to the kids. Again, our job as a board is to work with the families and really ensure that we're gonna do right by the education in our town. And so I see what you're saying, but I think, you know, if we were running over every single year and had to go to the Board of Finance and ask for more money, then, you know, Ashley probably wouldn't have a job. We'd be questioning Brian's contract, and it would be, you know, mismanagement of funds, and then they wouldn't have our vote of confidence. Sorry, Ashley, but I think that's the reality. And I think Kevin could probably understand that, and Rose too. I think when you sit in these positions where you're managing big budgets, you have to make choices. So though we come in with, this is all we need and this is all we want, there's creative ways to pivot around it to do what we can with what we have.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I want to say is, you look at this chart here, budget funding. At one time, getting 1% definitely wasn't adequate. And that we have been supported relatively well the last 4 years. So when the signs were up and said, you know, we support education things, I would agree based on the number, that's the truth. But I think the other thing, look at your chart, Sal, I only had a moment to look at it. Some of this is COVID, so I don't think those anomaly years are really.
We're thinking across the year.
But some of our COVID years, we talked about that in the after COVID year, about why the anomaly was transportation, why that run. But I think the bigger picture is, whether we have 1% over, 2% over, why are you over? I would say, here we speak about the business world about, I think, my understanding is to have a 1% to a 4% overage in a budget of $50 million is doing a good job with the budget. You spoke to me about what the town has over every year. Why is it that the board, and then if you're gonna question where the end of the year money is, like it's questioned every year, why not ask what it's spent for? The things that we've done for capital improvements that we have money for equipment. When equipment numbers, when now it's 20,000, you put something in the equipment, we don't have the money for equipment. Or the technology, we don't have replacement cycles, have the students have the technology. If you want to say how's it going to suffer, I believe my job with the board is to, whatever you give us, whatever you put forth for your number, whatever the town gives us, is to manage it the best I can, to do as much as I can for students so they don't feel it. So people don't come out and say, why are my kids getting the best education they can? That is my job. So when you say, well, does it really matter? Because, you know, we managed just fine. If I didn't manage fine, I wouldn't be sitting here anymore, first off. So I don't think that's, you know.
Yeah,
so-
but all I'm saying is, from my perspective, it says you're comfortable with what's provided. You're comfortable. I mean, you can't say that.
And I just said, getting at the 3%, it was a good budget for the last 5 years. I started off my statement here. So I said that publicly.
Again, to George's point, you come up with, you recommend a 6% increase when you've been comfortable with 3% or whatever throughout years. Okay, fine, there's some
And the
different
boards-
circumstances have changed, But I still question. you.
I know, we're not really focused this question, that's your job, I get that. But I think the biggest question here is that based on the board, which I haven't had in my years, as a superintendent or lieutenant, the board increasing the budget hasn't happened before, and the rationale behind it is, given where students are today after the pandemic, the learning loss, you spoke of this earlier, the learning loss, as well as that students have issues that they're dealing with, the social emotional state of students, that this time to start cutting staff on the initial budget is not the place that the board wanted to be.
He came in cutting and we looked at it and said, we're just not comfortable. So I guess my question, I didn't have time to look at this beforehand, and I apologize. But so it shows where our budget surplus is, and you said that this is gonna be shared with the community and needs to be, so they understand. What about the town side? Do we have the same one for the town that could be provided and also shared with the community? Because I believe that they get a smaller percentage and came up with a much bigger surplus. That wasn't talked about. I just think for transparency, if we're gonna be
But here's the
particular
thing.
about education.
But here's the thing, you're telling the parents we have issues, right, when you don't really have issues, and then you're saying the parents are nervous and complaining, you don't have budgeted.
I'm not
So,
saying the
but
parents,
yeah, you are, you're saying.
parents have expectations that we want to
No,
follow.
but you're saying
Yeah.
you're complaining about things when you shouldn't be complaining, because you do give the impression sometimes that you have budget concerns when there shouldn't be any budget. That's all, I think we gotta
Can you
move
give me an
along.
example? No, I'm just, can you clarify that, please?
Oh, you see some of these charts where you say, we below the average cost of the state, so you give the inference that you need more. You include charts that are on the bottom of the list in terms of percentage wise, when you're not comparing. You know, we showed another chart last year that we compared to Dirk, where you were second to Rocky Hill, not on the bottom of the list, you know what I mean? So just the way you show the chart gives the indication that you need more, that's all.
We're stating, I think that the thing is, we're stating here what I put my budget for, what I needed to maintain, what I thought moving forward next year was needed. Like it's been done every year. Just like you do your chart, the way you recreated the pie chart and you put the school debt on the education side. Other towns don't do that. That's the way you chose to do it. So I think this is the way the board has chosen me to present the budget. It's not meant in a way, it's meant to be informative, just like yours is to show they had extra money. So it's not meant to be, and I told you last year, so I'll say it publicly. I thought it was very cordial last year. I didn't think it was this. And I said publicly to Mark about the 3% that it's been great those last year. So I'm not stating that, but it is my job, like your job, to look at numbers, say, do we believe this is what the board really needs? It's my job to put forth what I think we need to keep the education. And so, I mean, that's both our jobs, and it's not being hostile tonight either, but it doesn't need to be. In my opinion, it doesn't need to be hostile. You know, it doesn't need to be this, you're gonna give your opinion, give ours. Your feet on.
You know,
I just wanted to ask, do you consider the education system a public service or a business? Okay, so why are you comparing it to a business?
I'm not comparing it, I'm showing financial results.
Well, earlier you said like a business, you have some access, et cetera.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're in a business.
Right, yeah.
If you had excess, you would not go out and say, I'm gonna spend it, but the Board of Education doesn't have any choice. Because they actually get penalized if they don't spend all their budget. But, you know, if we're in tight times, I wish you could save some of that money and put it into the general fund. You know?
Well, we always do give money back. It may not, Oh, go ahead.
Can you speak to some of the things that we spent the money on at the end of the year? I think it's important for the public to know that it's not being spent on items that haven't been on the equipment list or things that we've asked for, and just couldn't be funded, or things will be funded by the town, that there's money's there. We try to do its best doing playgrounds and paving. Ashley, do you have a few things you can just rattle off?
So, we buy technology for MacBook, or new labs, computer labs. We buy, if we can, we'll buy some software to take off the burden from one system to another. So if we get caught and we have some surplus, we'll buy in advance. In other years, we've done concrete repairs over at,
Phone system.
phone systems. We've done concrete repairs at McGee and at Hubbard. We've purchased cybersecurity things. We have done things like the ductwork projects, HVAC. If we get permission to go into the one or two.
And I'll ask the account when possible that you guys approve. We, you know, I just don't want the impression, man, I hope it's not that we're just spending on things.
It's not that at all.
That's right.
I think we really, to me, there's not a Board of Education budget, there's not a town budget, we're forced that way because of the state, whatever. There's a bucket of money, you know, where is it best spent? I mean, there's how many millions of dollars in capital, the request list, whatever that we put off funding for the last 5 years. They have like $3 or $4 million worth of that stuff. Some of that stuff is very important also. I don't know which one's more important. And I can't make that decision, or we can't make that decision because we don't get to see it. Okay, and that's sort of the nature of the way it's set up, and that's not your fault, it's not our fault, but it's not the ideal way to run. Okay, if it was a business, you know, a nonprofit business, so to speak, we wouldn't run it that way.
Well, all the money
You
would be
know?
spent at the end of the year, because that's how a nonprofit is run.
Which is
Whereas with
fine.
the corporation, everyone would be getting bonuses, so the money gets put in at the end of the year with the nonprofit. And we do actually give money back. We don't always give the full amount back, but we are always forthcoming on what is being spent and what is being.
Nobody's arguing that. My only point there was like money spent here versus, and this could go the other way too. I'm not saying it's always going BOEs, you know, maybe that could have been used over here. There's town money that could potentially have been used over here too, you know? And if, you know, if Aroche came in with a 1% budget this year, you know, we could be more receptive to giving you 4 or 5 or 6%, but that's not the case. So I mean, it's balancing the needs of everything. Again, this is really good. We've got especially a really acute year this year with everything that's going on. Even if we didn't have inflation and all that, we've got these major shifts. You know, when we say $1.9 million is shifting from commercial industrial over to the real estate side because of the reevaluation. So without any increases in anybody's budget, the homeowners are going to see a $2 million increase in their budget, no matter what. And then you've got the disparity where there's a almost 18% change in the value of things. That's not uniform. Not everybody went up 18%. I only went up 8%. Somebody else went up 25%. So they're going to get that 2% that in that shift from commercial, they're going to get that additional 10% because their value went up. And it's nice to have a nice house and whatever, they should be able to afford it. And now they're going to get another 9% on top of that. We're going to have some very, very angry people.
So interesting time is.
I know. Yep, absolutely. So, you know, really quick, you guys have seen these slides each year. There's updated recent numbers of the per pupil expenditure, what Berlin pays with the state averages. Again, Berlin is state per pupil expenditure. And again, it just talks about the wealth ranking. We are 60 out of 169, which goes into our ability to pay. This is the historical Berlin net current expenditure. Brian, do you have anything you want to add on this particular slide before I move on?
Just shows the wealth ranking as well as we're rated by ranking of the town wealth as well as what they spend. So we were 106, 21. More current one there, I think it's 86.
So notice of federal funding, all the red has been removed.
Yeah, the red is what's being removed. So anything you see down the bottom in red, those are decreases moving forward. So in 2021, we had an extra 800,000 of grants and then 900,000 in 21. And then, so that's what's being decreased. So if you look at the black numbers there on the federal grant total, you can see that it's decreasing. But unless the red is what's same thing on the next one. State funding also is decreasing.
Then the elementary and secondary projected enrollments are on the next 2 pages. One thing that, so I do want to mention that we already mentioned, I know we already discussed this, after we did have over 100 new enrollments this year. Some of them came after October 1st, so they're not reflected in this. But you know, the question that doesn't need to be answered now, but could be answered later. Supposedly there's 300 new units coming into town and all of them are not age protected. So that would essentially is not accounted for in here, but that would add additional enrollment to our schools.
Just a comment on that.
Yeah.
Vast majority of that's not the next
It's just,
year. I mean, some of it will, the only one that's really coming online is 88 units in Deming Road. I'd be surprised if anything else shows up. The other thing is the vast majority of them are studio and one bedroom apartment. Now, I was on the planning and zoning, Peter, you were on planning and zoning. When we looked at 404 UT Berlin Turnpike, that's the 200 unit. They brought in a bunch of studies, whether we believe them or not, I don't know, but they brought in a bunch of studies, comparisons to other apartment complexes, whatever. That whole 200 unit apartment was anticipated to bring in about 7 students. Because the vast majority are studio and one bedroom.
The only thing I'm sharing that study, that was the increasing economic pressure we're having. People may, they are single parents, they may cram into a studio.
That's a good point.
We did-
You're right, that's a good.
We did ask last week, all upstairs to ask for those numbers, where they're being built on the apartments, what the anticipated, online when they would be available, just so we can have an idea, because we didn't. We weren't totally aware of them.
right,
Deming Road is the one that's probably going.
That's what we're like.
The rest, I think it's, I think it's 88.
and
that's-
what's-
They're predominantly one bedroom, yeah, they're affordable housing. too,
So with that also, you're gonna, if children are coming with, the tenants of those apartments and they are affordable housing, then we can, without having data and statistics in front of us, take a good assumption that there's gonna be increased special education costs associated with that.
You just
So,
gotta understand,
but
there are
if it-
regulations about kids in studio apartments and one bedroom apartments and so forth. Technically, they can't do it, but
But again, like it's, without having the data, it's just an important point to note and mention, especially down the road.
my point was, I don't think it's a 20, I think it's a year after regulation, that's all I was trying to think.
Thank you. So, just as. There's 2 other slides after this, but you can just look at them on your own. It's important, a school district's budget reflects the commitment of the community to invest in the future of our children. The erosion of funding for education challenges the sustainability of Berlin as competitive school district with rich educational and co-curricular opportunities for our students. So you guys have, we have a job. This is the budget we are standing behind, and supporting as a majority vote of 72, 5.81%. I can stand by it confidently and talk to any parent who asks, even if they challenge it, but I will say that, we've done our job and now we're trying to you do your job, and thank you for taking the time. I know it was a longer than anticipated discussion, but really good questions.
I got a question. Instead, you guys came in, I'm sorry. You guys had came in at cutting, what were you cutting?
What positions was that?
Well, you said you guys.
Yes, I
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
4.87%.
Yeah.
The reductions that I had were 4.87% for all staff positions. We had a custodian that was, we had 2 permanent building subs, which you asked, how does it impact learning? Well, when we don't have subs, we pull reading teachers, math teachers that work with media students covered in class because we have to. We also had, we had 2 positions at the high school, 2 high school teachers that were being reduced.
Your high school position?
Yes, 2 high school positions. And we had a lead teacher, so we were no longer gonna have a math, we have a math, we have a math program for students that need additional help. That was gonna be reduced in high school. We're cutting the lead teacher at the lead. So all the money that was put back in, that 1%, or more than 1%, for all staffing positions.
And you guys said you guys were 72?
70.
What was the conversation? How do you guys come up to the 5.84?
That's what all the staffing that were on the original cut.
Yeah,
My
that's
cut,
added
were
back
added
in.
back in, that's what gave it, that number, nothing else.
You guys were 72 on that budget.
Before we were presented, we had emails and parents show up and call
It went on social media
nonstop
today.
saying they wanted these teachers and stuff, so.
Mhm.
Okay.
So some of the parents are here to see them.
Um,
Came out.
you know,
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to get out of town. We don't.
You don't have to watch it, huh? Give it to him. You got 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go fast.
You're okay with your slide, Sal? Do you want to, Sal, you're okay. Do you want to go through your slides? You're good? Okay. So the next section is general government. This is, as you can see the chart, it's a 1.9% increase. We did exclude the additional police officers, 2 of which were approved during this fiscal year, 2 are proposed for next fiscal year. The increase at 1.9%, most of the items are essentially flat. You have to give a shout out to Mr. Simons and his efforts to negotiate around the gas and diesel and really take advantage of stabilized prices when they did and sign in a contract through fiscal year 24. Health insurance administration bid is out. There's a change possible, but we are still at the 10%. Non-public safety personnel changes. Town manager directed the staff that if you want to make personnel changes, they need to be self-funded. So if your department generates revenue, that's to be incremental revenue with it, or if you want to reorganize. The existing wage net increase is $182,000 of that $640,000 increase. Health insurance is $210,000. We do have 2 new positions or new position wages at $165,000. That is all in the golf course. You recall the reorg that was done there. That is funded through Timberland fees, not taxes, just to be clear to everybody. Timberland is self-funding. There are times when the weather may cause it to go a little negative, but the most recent years, it's gone pretty substantially positive. So while that is in there, that is not a tax burden for the folks. One other thing I want to talk about, we did mention this a couple of years ago, and it was brought up during the audit exit 2 cycles ago, and we're implementing this year, is moving the police extra duty. These are charges for when a police officer is out with the car and the flag. If you see them go by, if Eversource is doing work, Connecticut Natural Gas or phone company or someone else, and there's a police officer there, we charge for that. And there's an upcharge and a charge for the vehicle. That's standard. Other towns do it as well. That has historically been in the general fund, both the receipts and the expenditure costs. We are budgeting to move both of those out. So the revenue would come out, but also the expenditures would come out. If you look in the police budget, there is $35,000 left in that budget. That represents the expected extra duty services that will be waived. We anticipate annually, the biggest one is the Berlin Fair that's waived. Council waives that. There are some other instances that are advantageous to the community. There are charities, there may be religious organizations, others who come forward. So we are leaving that in there because that's really a decision on behalf of the taxpayers. But the rest of it comes out to maintain budget neutrality. So again, the revenue and expenditures come out. The idea would be that surplus money any surplus generated, which would basically be if the fringe benefits that we charge are higher than what is actually incurred, or the charge that we have embedded in there for the cost of the car, because they are using one of the town's police cruisers. That extra money would then be transferred to help purchase vehicles, which would relieve burden on the taxpayers. It may be one car. I can tell you that the budget last year was $470,000 for this year. Fiscal year 22 ended at over $600,000 in revenue. There was a massive amount of work going on. Police officers did a considerable amount of extra duty work. That money was useful in funding a number of initiatives at the end of the year, from the council can certainly attest, and the Board of Finance knows as well, because every time we get to the end of the year and there's extra money, we have to go through the council and Board of Finance to move that money to whatever is intended. So the idea there would be to create a funding mechanism to at least relieve some, if not all, of the burden on purchasing police vehicles.
So what would the impact be?
What would the impact be?
Well, if you're saying you're removing this activity that all used to be in the general fund.
Mhm.
And which means the residual extra charge plus the change in the fringe benefits used to be in the general fund.
Yep.
About how much is that? Because we're gonna have to make that up.
Well, that would have been a surplus at the end.
It would have been. I mean, but if we didn't appropriate it to equipment or some other needs.
Yep.
So I'm saying,
It averages
What-
historically,
what-
in an average year, it's been about $100,000.
so that's $100,000 that the general fund will have to make up.
Well, not from a budget standpoint, because we always budgeted flat. It would have been actuals that came through higher.
So you never budgeted for the fees, you just.
We would budget for an additional increase, so you get about 12%. So 12% on a $470,000 budget would be rough numbers, $50,000.
And how does that work for cops outside the? It's a written cop working.
We are charged by New Britain and we pay them.
Okay.
They would charge us. We would essentially not make really much of anything off of it. That's also one of the reasons why the chief actually expanded when he arrived and provided opportunities to folks who wanted to do extra duty work and were previously not included, including our deputy chief who wanted to do the work, is doing the work, and that's an opportunity for him, but also for the town to retain that amount.
So basically, when some of us talk about how is the surplus generated each year, this number would be part of
It
it.
would contribute, assuming the police did it. And I mean, the chief sitting there's a lot of people working a lot of hours in that department.
The other side of the coin is when there's 100,000, it's 100,000 less that you have to come up with to buy a police cruiser. It's there dedicated for that purpose, and that's gonna happen every so often, right? We have to keep replacing the cruisers the way it's
Well,
going.
it's still gonna have to be appropriate.
Yes, I know.
It would. And you should expect we're on the replacement cycle to do 3 police cruisers every year. We finally caught up and we've stayed on that cycle. As we expand the force, that becomes even more important. You're going to have potentially an extra patrol officer on some of the shifts, and they're going to need vehicles. These vehicles work a lot. One of the questions, I know Brian brought it up before, and I was going, how do you get 1.9% knowing that you have increases and things in there? There's 2 huge drivers of this. First is we budgeted a 10% increase for health insurance, and our renewal came in very late in the process. We had 7.1% for this fiscal year. Our starting point is the actual. So if you can think about how did you go up 1.9% against the current budget, we actually started with a number that was lower. We took the actual 7.1. So that reduction, that was a starting point in terms of budgeting. So the 1.9 is compared to your budget last year, but we didn't want to just ignore the fact that health insurance costs are starting from a lower point. So the 10% increase is off of a lower number. The second piece is we've been able to hire for some positions at lower than anticipated salaries. You know, if the marketplace will bear it, we anticipated some spots at a certain level and we've come in a little bit less than that, which benefits as well.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You know, the last couple of years, we've had some sizable surplus in the labor areas, right? Blue collar primarily.
Actually, police primarily.
And then, so in this current budget, how many open positions are there? So, you know, in other words, how many vacant positions are you assuming?
I mean, the chief can speak to the PD.
I know the PD is 4.
Okay.
Right. Is there any other?
Actually,
PD is more.
you're at 7, right?
We're at 7, we're gonna be at 8, and then probably 9.
That's right, because it's a couple more.
And also keep in mind, 2 of those positions, while they are filled, one is an individual who was seriously injured off duty, who's been on unpaid leave the entire year. The other is a person who's in the military on military leave, and we are only paying 25% of his budgeted salary. The remaining amount comes from the Fed. So those are 2 positions that are not in that number, but represent savings against the budget. They are budgeted full staff. Ideally, the person who's on military leave will be back by April and hopefully, and coming back and will be here and will help relieve some of the pressure of the vacancies. We're achieving vacancies not the way we want them. I can tell you that for the past few years, we have been down 2 full-time positions in the planning department that has 3 full-time and 1 part-time position right now. So to be down 2/3 of the positions, I would imagine that there are some developers who would tell you, you know, how does the town pay the price for it? There's probably a few developers who tell you I paid the price for it. Because as a human being, our planner and her clerical person and a part-time person there can only do so much physically. So we had situations there as well, but every year in and year out, the police are the biggest area where we end up with turnover, unfortunately.
So I mean, what we did last for this current year, we said you kind of told us, well, we probably won't be able to hire all these people. You know, we're in a budget here, so people having budget issues, right? We say 9 people, we only say 7 people, and say, if you get 9 people, we'll approve it incrementally. You know, so that's how we treated it, you know, last year. So we just kind of want to understand, we put 9 people in, or for this year's budget, can we put 7 in or 6, so that, you know,
In other words, full staffing would be 44, we would stay at for now. You know, we could add the other 2 as we fill the position.
Oh, that's just the question.
That would depend on like, in the academy, right? How many can get in the academy, right?
That's the key.
Yeah.
That's not, we have no control over
Yeah.
the academy, as far as getting seats. But what happened in the past, we always seemed to be offbeat. We were needing people, we didn't have seats. When seats were available, we couldn't get people, and then we moved the seats. And you know, you're dealing with a state administration that says, hey, you gave back the seat, so the next time seats are available, well, Berlin gave back seats, so they're not gonna get seats in the next academy. And each one of those, is you've got to figure it's at least a 9-month cycle, because it's 9 months from hire date to completion, 6 months in the academy, and then 3 months on FTO, before they become a certified officer.
Yes. So the likelihood of filling even 44 is remote at this point.
We're trying, but
No, but I'm saying it's not a practical.
like I got 2 seats coming up in April.
Yeah.
And we just had to put out for, a request in our police app that we're looking for lateral entries. We're not gonna get on bites on lateral entries, because if you're in another agency and you're certified, you're gonna go where they're paying you the best and, you know, the best benefits and all that stuff. We're not there. But I can tell you, today I had to let go of 4 applicants that got to their backgrounds and failed their psychologicals and their polygraph. And that's cost, because we cost us money to send them to these guys.
Now, the good news is, the defense are rolling out.
Yeah,
You'll have more applications, more interested candidates coming, right?
yeah,
So I don't think we
it's not
can.
just one piece, it's multiple pieces.
Exactly.
But our concern is just that we don't want to have to budget and lock up that money for the 2 additional persons when there's really not a chance in hell of actually filling those positions this year. Or if, let's say you get to 44 and you can do it, you can always come back and say, hey,
Mhm.
no, we can improve it.
Yeah.
I have a question.
All right, we will, we'll jump on to revenue. So we're getting out of the expense world and some of the other stuff. You know, you look at the pie chart, that blue portion keeps growing every single year. So you're up to about almost 89% of the general fund budget is funded through local taxes. The collection rate we've held at 99.3%. That is a very high collection rate. I can tell you by comparison to other communities, that is very high. And it's a testament to our revenue collector office that they're able to achieve that number every year. State education grants are essentially flat. The governor's budget proposes to reduce it by about $8,600. So when you're dealing with close to $6 million, that's essentially flat. The motor vehicle cap, that is included. Last year when we were doing the budget, we didn't know what was going to happen with it. There was nothing in there. The mill rate was adopted and we said, you know what, we're going to let it ride and work through the year. The governor did include, based on the previous year's activity and the mill rate, he did include money in there. So that is in your revenue line. What I will say is it's 32, you know, we're north of 32, but not at 32.46 in the mill rate that's proposed here. Assuming that you are going to pass this budget or something less, you're likely going to be at less than 32.46. That's why I say not likely to repeat, because if it's based on 1 year in arrears, and this year drops below 32.46, we are no longer eligible to get that grant. Now, I'm not suggesting you would want to be overtax people just so you can get a grant. I'm just saying this will truly be a one-timer. User fees, they're essentially flat with the exception of the police extra duty that I mentioned. Interest income increased by $1 million. Now, we're expected to be up considerably this year. There's 2 parts to that. One is the interest rate. You'll recall early in the year, I pointed out when the budget was adopted last year, we were at 0.25% interest. We're earning 4.6% with STIP right now. So it is a huge increase. Yeah. The other side of that is the money you have. We're going to use $5 million of ARPA money hopefully everything comes together and Willard's HVAC is upgraded. But that $5 million has been sitting in our bank account earning 2, 3, 4% as we've gone through the year. When you fast forward to next year, assuming everything goes under course, we're not going to have that money to earn interest. We're going to have improved air quality at Willard, but not that money. We also received $5 million upfront funding in LOTSA for the 3-road project, Porter's Pass, Deming, and Christian Lane. And that money won't be there in the spring. Hopefully that will move from complete mess to a great setup and a road for a long time. So, we don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. This is based on projections from some of the major houses as to the expectation that eventually rates will cap and then come back down a little bit. But who knows? We thought we beat inflation in December, and then January came back to bite us. So who knows? But also that tens of millions of dollars will be out of the opportunity to earn interest. But it's up $1 million. We're replacing one-time items between the $185,000 that was put in for the pension last year and the $380,000 that was added at the very end to pull out of fund balance and $300,000 of ARPA money that was pulled in. The current fiscal year 23 budget includes $865,000 of really one-time revenue items. So effectively, the higher interest earnings are offsetting the one-time items that we had. Fund balance is proposed to only cover contingency. This has been a practice the last few years. Contingency is there and it's an appropriation, so we don't have to do a non-budget appropriation in the middle of the year. If something comes up, it's now just a transfer. And it doesn't seem fair to tax people for a possibility. So that is proposed to come from savings so that it would go back if it's not used, as has been the case the last few years. That is largely the revenue. This chart, you'll recall, this is the left side where we've been using the last few times, where we start with now the 6/30/22 audited ACFR unassigned fund balance, just over $13 million. We've already appropriated 50% of that 4th fire vehicle to catch up on the fire vehicles. Percival field work, $300,000 for the design and bidding work around the police station, $1 million for the Atkins Street purchase. The next level down is projected, obviously unaudited, and this is projected at this point, additional revenue, so surplus revenue and surplus expenditures. The largest driver of the surplus revenue is the interest that I spoke about. We have $55,000 in the budget, not anticipating that interest rates would spike the way they did. So we're looking at in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $2 million favorable right there from interest. The other part is we had a tax sale. So we had to take a break for a couple of years during COVID. The governor put a moratorium. And so this was an opportunity to address folks who were delinquent in their taxes. Most of those, not all, but most of those were actually investment owned and often out of town and some even out of state owners. So we were able to collect from people who really have no connection other than they own some property and didn't want to pay taxes to Berlin. Tax collector went out and got that money. And then some unplanned state grants. You've already appropriated $400,000 of the unplanned revenue sharing grant to help with the scanning project in anticipation of the police station. So we have those. The largest driver of the expenditures at this point is vacant police officers. It's a moving target. Unfortunately, it seems to be moving up in terms of surplus number because of the vacancies. Our hope is between now and the end of the year, that number will go the other way because that means you have a better staffed police force.
Got ballpark now,
Ballpark.
How much of the 1.4 million?
Right now, I would estimate that between 500,000 and 600,000 there.
The other big one?
There's various elements, but nothing of that magnitude. We have some opportunities in contractual services.
I can look it up.
I think there's about 100, I would estimate about 100 to 125 grand in electricity. But there's always a wild card there because you don't know utilization as well. From that, proposing, and this will appear later on, the budget proposes to use just over 4.1 million of that projected surplus of about 4.5 million to help offset the elementary school HVAC projects at Griswold and Hubbard, as well as to help with the police station renovations. Again, you'll see the 403 is in red because that has already been appropriated and we're already in the process. In fact, today was the first day of the actual on-site scanning work. Doing that would leave about $260,000 as of today. It would be wise to leave a little in there because of two factors. One is this is based on 11.3% of the FY23 budget. While the budget that's proposed to you, I don't think anybody's under the illusion that will be the final budget. You can likely expect the number will be higher, which means as that number goes up, the 11.3% will come down. And 260,000 is a projection as of March 1st. It would not be wise to try to drive that to zero now because any number of factors can happen between March and June 30th. So the other part I would point out that 11%, one of the reasons we've always kept it there is it is a backstop. You know, you've got lump sum DB payouts. On February 10th, one of the five we've had for a while now, since the last chief and a longstanding sergeant retired, we've been talking about the 5 people who are still in the pension plan. One retired officially on February 10th, who's not here. And another is leaving, it sounds like early April, who is in the plan. And so 2 of those 5. I'll talk about the pension a little later, but just to get a jump on it, you know, you're 86% funded right now. You see it every single month in the finance status report. The challenge that happens when you're 86% funded and someone leaves is you have to fund 100% of their payout. So by the nature of just washing things out, the numbers come down. When those 2 folks come out based on the projected payout, your 86 will go down to 79% funded just from paying them out. So it's still a backstop for the pension. We've got money in here, the actuarial projection of what needs to be in there. Again, the 3 who are in there can retire at any time. They are all qualified for it. It also is.
So you're factoring those in to the June 23 fund balance. We're probably below the 11%. If we take out debt.
If you were to pull that,
We are gonna have to take that.
what's that?
The 2 pensions.
No, the pensions are, you're 86% funded. There's money at Prudential to fund both of
We've
those.
got enough there.
Yeah, you'll be down to 79% funded. There is money there. There's money to write those checks right now.
All of them leave.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever been able to say that in one of these
That
meetings.
is
There's
not-
money there.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, I don't work in the department, the chief does, but I would rather actually have the money and the 2 people working because I know the one who left and the one who is leaving, and they're both very highly regarded and very highly thought of. So, but you know, you get to retire and I'm jealous. It's the other thing is looking at the backstop. You know, you've got Biscaglia Field. So we received a grant from the state and we'll be renovating Biscaglia turf. But the cost of that continues to go up as everything does. When this first started, we were talking about 1.6, 1.7 million. We're probably talking north of 2 million to do that. So the fund balance also serves as a backstop to help if that runs a little bit higher. That is a heavily used field. Brian's probably the best person to speak to the use of Biscaglia. Or you just take a look at the aerial shot and the video on the town website and you will see the dirt and a little bit of green on the outside. So the HVAC upgrades, you know, if we get to a point where something runs over, depending on what happens, it can happen when you're doing building renovations, that can happen. Police station renovation, same thing, Steel Boulevard. We have a piece of property that needs to be remediated. We know it's contaminated. And so that ultimately is the town's burden. The state has helped considerably with grants. We have a good partner in Newport and they've invested money themselves. But at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, we own cleaning up that property to help put that building in and any future buildings. The local share of grants, and you'll see later on as we get to transfers, we're trying to fund some of that. But the state has really moved to a spot where they want to partner with towns rather than just handing over a bunch of money, that they want the town to have some skin in the game, 5, 10, 15, 20%. The council, when they get grants, and I think Jim Mahoney probably has it written into his grant proposals now. Here's the grant, this is the local share. School vans. I would encourage you as we go through capital or later on, that you look on the tab for school grants. I believe it's tab 8 in your book. The backside has the schedule of all the grants, the mileage and the years. There's just several of them that need to be replaced over the next 3 years. I think the document speaks for itself. Griswold Portables. I know when you guys did your tour, probably it was 2 years ago now, you were looking at the restrooms and various things. And one of the comments I heard from more than one person is these portables are in bad shape. So it's one of those things there. And then Timberland buildings and also the bridges and things. Also, keep in mind, the town is the backstop for the other two water districts and Berlin Water Control. Berlin Water Control is a proprietary fund, so it's intended to run on its own, including capital. But if something went south, the town is the backstop. In addition, Kensington and Worthington fire districts are independent, but if something goes wrong with them, it becomes part of the town. East Berlin was a separate water district, and years ago, it went south, and it is now part of Berlin Water Control. The insurance funds. We have strong reserves and we keep up with that, and we're very adamant about that. But if there is a major issue with the health insurance or general insurance, and then also special education costs. Brian alluded earlier, they have very good budget development and management and work hard. But if something happens and special ed costs go completely off the reservation, they're going to have to turn back to the town and say, we need a supplemental appropriation, and it's fund balance from there. So I would caution not to go below what you've already used. You have the 11% policy. That's ultimately your call.
You're basically saying whether I'm them, we end up giving it to them.
If it happened, yeah. I mean, if the special ed costs go up, either because there's physical needs. We had a kid a couple of years ago that was coming into, I believe it was Griswold, we had to add curved ramps because of access, just physical access. That's not hey, we don't have money for a budget. It's a town building. We've got to get it done. It's about as blunt as it can be, right? Any questions before I go on to? No, this is if it went above that. And you're talking 3 schools. We'll go through it right here. But this incorporates, this is assuming we're going to do all 3 schools. So, the ARPA money for Willard is substantial money to help with that school. But it was also identified, Willard was identified based on facilities recommendation because of the age and quality.
On the one below, about the insurance.
Yeah.
The health insurance was $230,000. Were all the unions involved in the negotiation? Including the teacher union?
This round, yes. Out to bid, yes. All of the unions, including all of the Board of Ed. So the teachers union, the administrators, everybody.
So that's 7%. One reason.
Right now, we're budgeting 10%, and we're trying to figure out where to go. But we watch it very tightly. In fact, we watch it every week. We watch where it's going. Because at the end of the day, it's a substantial amount of money. I mean, the town is going to spend $7 to $8 million on claims, as well as close to another $1 million in administrative and stop loss insurance. It's one of, after salaries, after wages, insurance is basically the next biggest thing in the debt service, unfortunately. So yes. Long-term liabilities. So we've had the practice borrow less than we're retiring. The last 2 years, that's been easy because we borrowed 0. The recommendation this year is in the effort to complete 3 big projects, and I've taken Willard off because of the ARPA grant and where that sits. The idea here is the PD renovations, HVAC in Griswold and HVAC in Hubbard. We don't know if we're going to get the state grant we applied for, the competitive state grant, and we don't know if we do get it, what we will get. But we have to project something at this point because we get one shot at a budget. We continue to monitor it very closely. So if I start on the left side, we've got construction costs. That's based on the estimates that we used before from the architect. It's increased, and then removing the contingency that's in there. We don't bond for contingency. Now, if we have to, if we eat into contingency and need the money, we will. But we have the practice of not bonding that up front, because just like we don't want to bond, we don't want to tax people for contingency. You don't want to borrow money you may never need. $316,000 was design and bidding that you've already appropriated. $1 million of the surplus that I mentioned earlier when we were walking through would call for bonding about $4.2 million for the police station. Unfortunately, because of the way the charter is written and the way we have to do it, because it exceeds 5 million, that bonding would require going out to a referendum. I do know there's a meeting with the PBC and the architect tomorrow, and going to try and get alignment and figure out where that goes. So this is certainly can be a moving target.
The 4.1 is the whole project.
No, the
Phase 1, 2, and 3.
5475 is the project.
Granted, but we're only bonding with 4.1.
That would be the proposal.
Right, okay, but so with those numbers of 5.4, would be for the whole project, phase 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. Yes. And the bidding and management of the project. Yes.
So in the last Board of Finance meeting, we had a discussion where stated that there was confusion on, did we have a valid vote on the police department renovation?
Yep.
So do we or do we not?
Well, I guess the validity would be whether you trust the architect's numbers and the architect. Here's what I would say on that. In order to do the bonding, you have to have an appropriation of money to fund debt service. If you don't put it in the budget based on some estimate, if you don't budget now, you would be forced to either, one, delay the bonding until you did the budget again and put money in the budget later, or pull that from another source, which would likely be fund balance. So I walked you through the use of it. It doesn't mean it has to be used that way. It's a proposal to use it. So putting it in here provides the debt service budget to be able to actually sign. I mean, we can't, by state law, you can't sign up for an expense where there's not an appropriation to fund it. Nobody can.
The 6.2 is to the referendum.
The 6.2 would not, the 5475 would. The other two are actually below 5 million. Remember, these schools are separate projects. The state actually required us to submit applications separately. The schools are considered separate. One could get a grant, one could not. The PD, there's only one PD. If we had two police stations, if we had an outstation and the main, and we were redoing both, you could consider them two separate projects. They're two separate schools. They're two separate projects. 5475 at the top. Then, the other two parts to get to the 6.2. Yeah.
So I guess from the PD renovations and the bonding and needing something in there, even to be able to move forward, does it matter if that bonding amount is more? I mean, why show and then we don't have to bond that much, right?
Well, the bonding, what's going to happen is the bonding leads to an amortization of the principal as well as applying interest. So if that number is higher, you're going to amortize a bigger number over the years for the bond, which means your debt service in the budget would be higher.
I guess I'm getting at, when you said that, I don't understand a lot of this, that you needed something in here, otherwise, if you had nothing in here and then we decided to move forward, then we have to go through another budget cycle and you have to put something in here. What if the estimates come in and you need to bond more than this number?
Then we'd either have to, we could do one of two
I mean,
things.
can you raise that number? My point is, what's the value of showing $1 million surplus versus showing 5.158 million for the bond? And then we can always apply a surplus to it later, but we have more money in there as.
Well, if you show 5158, assuming a 10-year bond, you would move from asking taxpayers to fund 416,000 of principal to funding 516,000 of principal.
But we could do that for the bond authorization, even if we intend later to apply fund balance to it before we actually bond it.
That's what I'm saying.
We go through the authorization process to do the appropriation and the bond authorization for the same amount, which is the total 5.1.
Oh, you could, well, I put the number of 6.5 out so that contingency and inflation would be there. But the motion did not move forward because at this point, there was not a comfort level in the numbers to move forward and say, I want to put anything out there.
Yeah, I mean, if we haven't had more movement towards a final number on this project, I would be saying, and looking back at your schedule here on fund balance, to leave that, or, you know, how to use the fund balance, to leave that out for now, and we'll go back and approve it when needed.
But if you were to do that and not do the bonding,
Not do the bonding.
I mean, you could do that. That's fine. This is just a proposal.
If
You
we
can
don't
certainly do
the
that.
Bonding, then the project isn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Hey, like I said,
Bond, again, it's like proposing that the bond would be higher, but then once we understand it, if it came out like you said, we could still, when we go to do it, bond less money and apply $1 million in surplus, right? Is there anything that holds you back when you put 4.158 million in there? If you put that in there now, and the project comes in at 6.45, and you really like the bond 5.158, can you just change it and bond more, or are you in trouble at that point?
well, the bond would not be based on what's here. The bond would be, the authority to do it would be based on the resolution, whatever the ordinance would say. That's why we typically go for an ordinance that's higher than what we need, because we can always, every year, I come back to you guys or to the council before the Board of Finance existed and deauthorize whatever is left over. It's kind of like getting a credit card for $1,000. You spend 900 and come back and say, cancel my card. I don't need the other 100. That's essentially what we
I
do.
guess I'm trying to understand, what's the implication of doing it this way? Why are we doing it this way? I just don't
I
understand.
think before we like continue with this, we should wait and see what the public building does tomorrow night, because they might be some different plans they're thinking about.
Yeah.
You know.
This just outlines what's in the budget. This is, you guys have every right to change it around however you want.
I think it's a well thought out, you know.
Yeah, it's a good way. It's just wait and see what we get.
The proposal, what Kevin's trying to do is to get to the 11% use, effectively use the fund balance, minimize the borrowing, and see if we can get all three projects done at the same time. I mean, there are different ways we can do it. When the numbers come out, maybe we can do that.
Yeah. So, you can see the numbers. I'll let you look at them for the HVAC projects, assuming, we get $1 million. This is assuming $1 million each for HVAC grants. I don't know if either one will be approved, if both will be approved, if the amount could be greater, the amount could be smaller. So we're trying to project to figure out how to continue with the borrow less than you retire rate mantra. So you're continuing to bend your cost curve. The other thing I want to highlight is, as you think about what if we didn't do this, or what if we waited, the plan, which I would encourage you to look at the capital plan, there's a lot in there because there's a lot of needs and we've been deferring quite a bit. The items that are on here, these are the future projected debt issues. We don't have to issue debt for these, but with a track record of funding little or nothing of capital, we're not going to be left with many options other than debt. And I will tell you from this list, none of them are exciting things, but they're very important things. I mean, it's replacing the windows at all of the schools, with the exception of BHS because it's newer. You've got some bridge work there. You've got boilers. We've got the pool buildings. This is my 7th budget, and every year we've talked about the pool buildings, and every year they kind of get pushed out and pushed out. I think the health department would like us to replace them because they go in and find problems every year. Our facilities group does a great job of fixing them, but there's a lot out there that we need to do. Rather than giving you the eye chart, although the eye chart of all the numbers is in your book, if you would like to see it, decided to go this year with a little bit of a chart. So this goes back again to 2010, like we have every time. You can see the spike and the mountain you come down from. The green bar is the budget where we're looking this year. We talk about 40 million being sort of the maximum level you want to think about. A community like this, you want to be at around 3 to 4% or less, ideally, of your operating budget spent on debt service. If you went back to where we peaked out, so 17, 18, you went up into that area, we were north of 13% of the budget. It just pushed out pretty much everything except the pension that we had to fund too. But as you come down, we're getting better with that. We're now down into the 8% range. The blue line is if you did nothing, just the existing debt, we let it run off. You could see where it ends up and you drop down below the 40 million by 2026, which we've talked about. That's only 2 more fiscal years out that we're budgeting 24 now. The red is the items that we talked about in the plan that I said for this year and for those other items on the chart. It's not a dramatic leap, but I think it would dramatically improve the quality of your schools, would improve the pool buildings and other things that are long overdue. The pension, I just wanted to quickly walk through the logic there. So, you're 86% funded. As I mentioned, it's 79% funded when you take the 2 who are retiring and leaving. Again, the pension, number 10, tab 10 in your binders has the actuarial projections. You'll see the $742,609 from the actuaries. That is the actuarial determined contribution. Oh, sorry, you guys don't. They do. Yeah. Yeah. You got 5 actives. I mentioned here that 1 active did retire. Another one has announced he's leaving and will be retiring. So, and then we have the new plan. The new plan has been in the process for over 2 years of meetings, long overdue. This is a critical element of trying to attract and retain police officers. Ultimately, if you want to attract the best in any profession, you want to be able to offer something competitive. We don't need to be the best at everything, but we need to be in the game at pretty much everything. And the DB pension is one that we're out of the game with our DC plan. We're not even considered for officers. The numbers that are in here, the normal cost and the annual town subsidy, are based on the police rolls. The actuaries have calculated them based on what we are working right now with the attorneys to develop the plan. So this is not a far-fetched element. This is the attorneys are actually drafting the plan. It's going to come out. You could not fund this and say, well, I don't have a formal plan approved. This plan, unless something changes dramatically, is moving forward. And by the time this budget goes into place, you should expect it to be in there. These are the actuarial numbers. There's 2 pieces. Normal cost is the annual cost of paying for this. So if you take the normal cost of 653 and compare that, it's about $200,000 higher than the existing DC plan in the budget. So it's about a $200,000 delta from what would otherwise have been in this budget. But then we also have an element of the DB plan offers benefits that are a little bit greater, and therefore there's a gap between what has been saved through the DC plan for many officers and what the DB plan would offer. That delta is a little bit over $1 million. This assumes a 5-year amortization of that so that the town would fund a catch up on that. That could be spread out a little bit longer. So you have the closed plan at 742, the new plan at 932, and the existing coming out at 457 gets you 1.2 million. The 1,033,000 change year over year is because there was 185,000 in this year's budget. That's why it's a little bit different. That's the logic behind the pension. We're getting late, so
without any kind of, this thing is gonna go through, basically.
ultimately it's the council's call. You have no authority to stop at the charter.
I'm just asking, we're going to push it out anyways.
Yeah. If you want police protection in town, it's probably best pass it. Or if you don't want police protection, and what that?
Is pay for this or buy ammo?
One of the two, but we could have the greatest school system in the world, but if we don't have police protection, it's probably not worth much of anything. It's probably gonna go through, I would guess, it will go that way. It's that critical. I mean, it's no jokes. It's not
We're running out the street.
Yeah.
We're running out the street.
That's it.
seriously dangerous.
What I will say to add on is, as Jerry mentioned, the catch up on the closed DB plan has been made through fund balance all these years. I would strongly urge you not to do that, because unlike the closed plan that could be thought of as debt, that it was finite, the number of people, it was closed. This is intended to be an ongoing active plan. And you're also going to be asking officers, some of whom have worked here for more than 20 years and saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in their pension plan, in their DC plan, to take that money and invest it. They're essentially investing in the faith of the town that we will honor the benefit payment rather than the contribution. So if if you're not making, if you don't embed that in the budget, that's, I would think it's going to cause at least the officers to pause for a minute and say, do I want to take what I've saved? Maybe not ideal, but I'm putting a lot of money into this. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think in ordinance to fund it too.
That would be great.
Yeah, so we don't run into what we ran into with
Yeah.
the old plans. Right.
Capital, I put this list out every year and I'll skip over it, but there's a lot of infrastructure here, which is great. There's a lot offered to residents. There is a lot in terms of passive recreation. There's a lot in terms of public safety, a lot in terms of athletics, school. What don't you?
Firehouse. So young.
You're right. You're right.
Can't forget it.
The capital budget, departments requested 5.4 million. We've whittled that down to 2.7 million. Rosha alluded to earlier. 0.9% of the capital assets, if you were to look at the gross capital assets in the audited financial statements. The primary focus of this list, and I shared the list with you at the last meeting, I won't go through all of the details, but the focus really has been around public safety, education, deferred purchases and projects, so things that have been on here for a few years and we need to do, and also supporting POCD goals. We really want to do that. I mean, if you look at the plan of conservation and development and how it's being worked up, there's a lot of really great things and a vision of where Berlin would be and what it would look like 10 years from now. That's really some really great stuff. But as you think about purchasing more open space or adding more trails or enhancing existing trails, as you talk about economic development, as you talk about, I don't know if I dare bring this up, but I will say community senior center of some iteration. You talk about all these different things. They're great. They make the community even better, but they require continued investments on top of the schools, the fields, the vehicles and everything else. I put down here the future. You know, as you start to look at the plan and where that goes, and again, you have a copy of the plan. It's also on the website. You know, we're looking at a lot of things that most of those things are not exciting things, but they are necessary things and they really are helpful. To the extent we keep pushing millions of dollars out, we can only push them for so many years before these numbers really grow. We try to really prioritize and then put surplus in there so that if at the end of the year there's money left over, we can fund some of these things, but there's many that we really need to do. This is the list. I won't go through the eye chart, but again, the whole plan for the next 10 years is out there. We're almost at the end. Transfers. So most of the transfers don't change year to year. These are transfers out to cover like insurance fund administration and others. We did lower POCD. We had to increase it because the contract came in a little bit higher. The goal is to spend $25,000 a year so that at the end of 10 years, when we have to do the next plan, there's actually money in there and we don't have to come back with a big spike. The same is true with the revaluation fund. Two new items that are in here. Back in, I believe it was 2016, I believe it was planning and zoning voted to create the Kensington Village Kensington Village Group. That requires an architectural review. And that's actually a state statute that they fall under that requires, I'm gonna probably get this wrong, but I'm gonna try to get it right, that anything built around that Kensington Village area where they're visible from Kensington Road, that the facade and anything that's out there on the building must have an architectural review to make sure that it's consistent with what was intended of the village. And that's, again, there's statutory elements to this. There was no money ever funded for that. So this is asking to put $25,000 into a fund. So when that needs to happen, we have some funding in place without it's not intended to be a big slush fund. It's $25,000. But it would allow for those reviews, especially as Kensington Village is one area of primary focus for significant economic development as we go forward. You got Steel Boulevard, you got all that area, making Kensington Village, making Farmington Ave walkable and all of that area. So the second piece is local match of future grants. I talked about that before in the effort of the state as well as private groups. Typically, when you're going for grants today, they're looking for a local match, some element. So you know, Jim Mahoney and I go back and forth every time he finds a grant and we're trying to find ways to scrape money. I'm gonna tell you that we've encumbered all but $13,000 right now with the open space in lieu of fund. So there's not really an opportunity to tap into anything. So if he wants to go for trail improvements, even something simple like just went for 2 that were pretty minor. So this is trying to put aside some money. Jim requested $1 million to do this so that they would have it. Town manager dropped that down. Especially in light of the size of the budget, but these are things where the town can often get 80 or 90% funding by putting in 10 or 20% of the cost. So it is a decent number, but if you think about leveraging that number with, you know, to take the old private sector world, other people's money, all of our money anyway, it's state money, but other people's money, that's what that's intended to do, and that's why that's in the budget.
But that's an item too, that you could always take that out of fund balance and not raise taxes for it when we don't have an immediate need for it.
You could, the one thing I would warn on is many of these grants have a reasonably narrow window of time. And taking out a fund balance, you could fund the 250 by appropriating fund balance in the budget. But if you were to wait, the non-budgeted appropriations are a multi-step, multi-meeting process. And most of the time, you probably wouldn't have a window to be able to do that work.
What about if we had it designated within fund balance?
Well, then it's assigned but not appropriated.
Yeah.
We still have to do the non-budget
Yeah.
appropriation by charter.
But would it help any if it was assigned? No.
I mean, it would designate it for something, but it wouldn't change the non-budgeted appropriation process. That's what I was gonna say. If you feel that that's the course, my recommendation would be put it in the budget and appropriate it now. And the intent of putting it in transfers, it would go to a non-lapsing fund so that it could be used. And then the only other thing I will say on that is we cannot apply for any grants legally anyway, without the council approving. They authorize the town manager to apply. So even if this money is put into a fund, it can't go anywhere without the council approving applying for the grant. So even if you appropriate it.
Yeah, my only concern is raising taxes for it.
Yeah, and if you wanted to use fund balance, my recommendation would be to do it through the budget, so the money's there. You don't have to go through the appropriations. I mean, Donna, how many times do you get grant information and there's 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
How can we jump through that, or else you miss the opportunity? And a lot of times it's 80% of what they're giving you, and it's 20 what we're giving back, you know, so.
The last piece I will cover is water control. The county council will be adding this, or assuming you will vote to approve, to add this to the referendum. We've had an opinion from the attorney that based on the charter, we should be including this on the ballot. So in addition to seeing this year, you will actually be bringing the budget forward for Berlin water control. The council will vote and it will be added into the ballot for everybody in town to vote. The number's actually coming down because we have a couple of capital items that have been in the budget for a few years. We're actually bonding for, so we've taken them out of this budget, which is by the reduction. There are a number of capital needs here. Water control will continue to borrow, continue to leverage. The great part about this is the state has 2 substantial funds, the Clean Water Fund and then its sister fund, the State Drinking Water Revolving Fund. Both are very valuable in that they offer us 2% interest. That was, we always balance, do we borrow ourselves or 2% for years? Now the 2% comes back to looking really nice again. So we will be leveraging that, but there are a number of projects that Ray and the Water Control Commission will be working on. So we could talk about this more, but that's everything.
Can you repeat everything? Good presentation. Nicely done. Appreciate the presentation by the board of education, superintendent and Kevin. We have to play a balancing act here, as you know it. To go in with a 10.4% tax increase. Maybe the parents are going to be upset about some of the Board of Education, but I can assure you the probably is upset about a 10.4% tax increase. So we got our work cut out to try to balance all this. And initially I strove for a 2% increase overall, but I couldn't get there. But I know it's a big challenge. But
You still got time.
But, we're working, for the finance, we're working with the Board of Education, we're working with the town side and see where we can get. Again, we don't want to take away the quality of service, either on the education side or the town side, but, then we just gotta work it. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for staying late, working so hard on this.
Move to adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Still early. Guys. I would figure you would serve food.